Readers are welcome to leave comments in the comments section.
The rain did not fall in Willow Bay, it pressed against the glass like a rhythmic, relentless confession. Inside the sanctuary of the relic vault, the world smelled strictly of dehydrated cedar, beeswax, and the sharp, vinegar tang of aged parchment. Evelyn adjusted the brass arm of her jewelless lamp, the warm amber beam slicing through the shadows of her workbench. She preferred the dead, they were quiet, predictable, and they stayed precisely where she left them. Then the bell above the heavy oak door chimed, a lonely, metallic shiver that shattered the midnight silence. Evelyn did not look up immediately. She finished securing a loose flake of gold leaf on a Regency-era compact before setting her tweezers aside. When she finally raised her gaze, the storm seemed to have washed something wild into her shop. The woman standing on the threshold was drenched, a dark woolen coat clinging to a frame that carried herself with an easy, deliberate grace. Strands of ink-black hair plastered against her collarbones, drawing attention to the sharp line of her jaw and a mouth currently curved into a faint, knowing smirk. In her arms, wrapped in a coarse, damp canvas shroud, she held an object the size of a showbox. "We are closed," Evelyn said, her voice smooth, level, and entirely unbothered by the late hour. "By about 3 hours, to be precise." "I know," the stranger replied. Her voice was lower than Evelyn anticipated, carrying a faint, smoky rasp that felt entirely too intimate for an empty room. She stepped forward, leaving a trail of dark, glistening footprints on the polished hardwood. "But the tide gave this up at dusk, and the salt is already eating the hinges. I was told you were the only woman within 3 states who wouldn't ruin it." The canvas slipped away as the woman placed the object onto the velvet counter. It wasn't wood. It was whalebone, smooth, aged to a deep, cream-colored patina, and bound by intricate, black and silver filigree. Evelyn's breath hitched, just a fraction, but she knew the stranger caught it. The woman's eyes, a striking, stormy gray, locked onto Evelyn's face, tracking the sudden focus in her expression. "Rose," the visitor introduced herself, extending a hand that was entirely devoid of rings. Her fingers were long, the skin slightly calloused, bearing the faint, clean scent of sea salt and something intensely clinical. Evelyn hesitated for a heartbeat before taking it. Rose's skin was freezing from the rain, yet the brief contact sent an unexpected, electric jolt straight up Evelyn's sleeve. "Evelyn. And you shouldn't be handling centuries-old organic matter without gloves, Miss Rose." "I handle dead things for a living, Evelyn. I assure you, my touch won't break it." Rose leaned against the counter, closing the distance between them. The warmth radiating from Evelyn's desk lamp seemed to trap them in a private, golden cocoon, separating them from the dark corners of the shop. "I'm a marine taxidermist. I preserve what the ocean tries to rot. But this needs a delicate hand. A restorer." Evelyn pulled her gaze away from Rose's lips, forcing her attention down to the artifact. The box was secured by an unusual, interlocking mechanism, 3 silver dials shaped like stylized waves, frozen around a central keyhole. "It's beautiful. And locked. Which is why I'm here," Rose murmured, her shoulder brushing against Evelyn's as she leaned in closer to inspect the silverwork. The proximity was intoxicating. Evelyn could smell the rain evaporating off Rose's skin, mixed with the faint, sharp undertone of formalin and a surprisingly soft trace of vanilla. "I have the key. But the internal mechanism is jammed with calcified sand. If I force it, the silver snaps. And if I refuse to open it tonight?" Evelyn asked, her voice dropping an octave. She didn't move away, despite the fact that Rose was now close enough that Evelyn could feel the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. Rose tilted her head, a stray drop of rain falling from her wet hair to land directly on the velvet counter between their hands. Then I suppose I'll just have to sit here and watch you work on something else until morning. The sheer audacity of the statement should have offended Evelyn. Instead, an unfamiliar thrill bloomed in her chest. She stood up, her gaze holding Rose's with challenging intensity. "Sit down, then. And take off that coat before you ruin my floor." Rose chuckled, a low vibration of sound that did terrible things to Evelyn's focus. She shed the heavy wool, revealing a fitted charcoal sweater that hugged the athletic lines of her shoulders. She didn't take a seat on the client chair. Instead, she pulled up a high stool right beside Evelyn's workbench, entering her personal workspace without a shred of hesitation. Evelyn pulled a pair of white cotton gloves onto her hands. "The key." Rose reached into her pocket and pulled out a heavy, tarnished brass key. Instead of dropping it onto the table, she held it between two fingers, waiting. Evelyn reached for it, but Rose didn't let go immediately. For 2 long seconds, they both held the key, their gloved and bare fingers practically touching, a silent tug-of-war of control playing out in the space between them. Rose's eyes softened, a dangerous, playful heat flickering in the grey depths. "Be gentle with it," Rose whispered, finally releasing her grip. "I am always gentle," Evelyn replied, her tone deliberately professional, though her pulse was hammering against her ribs. For the next hour, the only sounds in the room were the howling wind outside, the soft click of Evelyn's dental picks, and the steady, heavy rhythm of their breathing. Evelyn worked under the intense scrutiny of Rosie's gaze. It wasn't the box Rose was watching, it was Evelyn's hands. The precise, micro-movements of Evelyn's fingers, the way she blew away the loosened debris with a soft, targeted breath, the absolute control she maintained over her tools. "You're incredible at this," Rose said softly, breaking the silence. She had shifted closer, her chin resting on her hand, her face bare inches from Evelyn's elbow. "The patience you have. I usually work with a scalpel. It's less forgiving." "Patience is just a matter of wanting the outcome badly enough," Evelyn murmured, not lifting her eyes from the silver dial. She used a fine camel hair brush to sweep away the last remnants of centuries-old sand. "There. The 3rd tumbler is free." "Show me," Rose said, her voice dropping to a breathless whisper. Instead of moving back, Rose reached out, her bare hand hovering over Evelyn's gloved one. She didn't grab it, she simply guided Evelyn's hand toward the keyhole, her palm brushing against the back of Evelyn's wrist, right over the racing pulse point. The contrast of Rose's cool, bare skin against the thin cotton of Evelyn's glove was agonizingly sharp. "Insert the key," Rose guided, her breath warm against Evelyn's cheek. Evelyn's fingers shook slightly, a sin in her profession, but she managed to slide the brass key into the lock. It fit perfectly. "Now turn it." Slowly, Rose whispered, her face so close that if Evelyn turned her head, their lips would brush. The tension in the air was thick, heavy, and sweet, vibrating with a mutual, unacknowledged hunger. Evelyn turned the key. A heavy, satisfying click echoed through the quiet studio. The silver waves aligned. The lid of the whalebone box popped open by a mere millimeter, releasing a scent that made both women freeze. It wasn't the smell of decay. It was the scent of preserved, concentrated lavender, beeswax, and a perfectly preserved, folded piece of heavy vellum. But neither of them looked at the box. Evelyn finally turned her head. Rose hadn't pulled back. They were trapped in the amber glow of the lamp, their lips separated by less than an inch. Rosie's gaze dropped to Evelyn's mouth, her pupils dilated, her breathing shallow. Evelyn's hand was still trapped beneath Rose's on the workbench, the heat between their palms intense enough to melt the storm outside. "We opened it," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We did," Rose agreed, her voice a sultry, captivated murmur. She didn't move away. Instead, her thumb lightly traced the exposed skin of Evelyn's wrist, a slow, deliberate caress that promised the night was only just beginning. "But I think the real mystery is just starting." The warmth of the amber lamp was a fragile barrier against the chill of the storm, but within its small circle, the heat between them felt almost tactile. Rose did not pull her hand away. Her thumb continued its slow, hypnotic stroke against Evelyn's wrist, tracing the frantic jump of her pulse beneath the delicate, pale skin. The contrast was maddening, Evelyn, pristine and composed in her tailored workspace, and Rose, damp from the tempest, smelling of wild salt and dark timber. "Are you always this easily distracted by your clients, Evelyn?" Rose murmured, her voice a low, teasing vibration. Her grey eyes drifted from Evelyn's mouth back up to her eyes, holding them with a terrifyingly beautiful intensity. Evelyn swallowed, forcing a coolness into her voice that she didn't feel. "Only when they bring me locked mysteries at midnight. And only when they refuse to respect my personal space." "Is this your personal space?" Rose asked, tilting her head slightly, her lips parting in a quiet, breathless laugh. She didn't retreat. If anything, she leaned a fraction of an inch closer, her shoulder resting entirely against Evelyn's. "It feels rather shared at the moment." "That is because you are crowding me," Evelyn whispered. Yet, she didn't pull her hand back. Her fingers, still clad in the white cotton glove, subtly shifted under Rose's palm, feeling the pressure, the solid reality of her. "The box is open, Rose. Isn't that what you came for?" "Partly," Rose admitted, her gaze dropping to the millimeter of space where the whalebone lid had parted from its base. "But the anticipation of the reveal is always the best part of any excavation, don't you think? Once it's open, the secret is gone. The mystery is solved." "And you prefer the mystery?" "I prefer the pull," Rose said softly. With a slow, agonizingly deliberate movement, Rose finally lifted her hand from Evelyn's wrist. The sudden absence of her touch felt like a physical drop in temperature, leaving Evelyn cold in the damp night air. Rose gestured toward the box with a tilt of her chin. "Go on. You have the honor." Evelyn took a stabilizing breath, adjusting the cuffs of her cotton gloves. She reached out, her fingertips catching the edge of the carved whalebone lid. It was cold, polished smooth by decades of handling, yet it felt heavy with the weight of the past. Slowly, she lifted it back. The hinges groaned, a dry, metallic protest that sounded like a sigh. Inside, resting on a bed of faded, midnight blue velvet that had miraculously survived the dampness of the ocean, was not gold, nor jewels. It was a singular, heavy glass vial, sealed with red wax, and beneath it, a folded piece of thick vellum paper. The scent of lavender and dried cedar wafted up, sweet and dizzying, cutting through the sterile room. "It's a letter," Rose whispered, her playful demeanor instantly melting into genuine awe. She leaned over Evelyn's shoulder, her chin practically resting on the curve of Evelyn's neck. "Look at the seal. That's a double-headed griffin. 1840s, maybe earlier." "Don't touch," Evelyn warned softly, though her voice lacked its usual bite. She used a pair of wide, flat-tipped brass tweezers to gently lift the vellum from its velvet bed. "The paper is highly acidic. If we open it without humidifying the fibers first, it will crumble into dust. You really are a perfectionist, Rose said, her voice rich with admiration. Her eyes traced the side of Evelyn's face, admiring the absolute focus that had returned to the restorer's features. And the vial? What do you think is inside? Evelyn set the letter down on a clean piece of acid-free tissue paper and picked up the glass vial. The liquid inside was dark, viscous, and clung to the sides of the glass like oil. It looks like some form of organic oil. Perhaps a perfume, or an apothecary's remedy. The wax seal is completely intact. She turned the vial in her fingers, the amber light of the lamp catching the deep, ruby-red undertones of the liquid. Whoever sent this box into the sea wanted these two things preserved above all else. A secret kept from the world, Rose murmured. She reached out, her bare index finger gently tapping the glass vial while Evelyn held it. Her finger brushed against Evelyn's gloved thumb, a lingering touch that felt entirely intentional. Or a secret meant for only one person. Someone they couldn't reach in life. Evelyn looked up, finding herself once again trapped in the storm of Rose's grey eyes. You sound like a romantic, Miss Rose. I thought taxidermists were supposed to be clinical. Cold. We preserve the dead because we find life beautiful, Evelyn, Rose said, her voice dropping to a soft, intimate register. There is nothing cold about wanting to keep something beautiful from fading away. The silence stretched between them, heavy and sweet, punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the skylight. The tension was no longer just professional curiosity, it was an unspoken, magnetic pull that seemed to draw them closer with every passing second. Evelyn cleared her throat, breaking the spell, though her heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She carefully set the vial down beside the letter. The vellum needs to go into the humidification chamber. It will take at least 20 minutes for the fibers to absorb enough moisture to be opened safely. You should probably dry off while we wait. Rose looked down at herself, a self-deprecating smile playing on her lips. I suppose I am a bit of a hazard to your paper. Do you have a towel, or should I just continue to drip on your floor? There is a small washroom in the back, Evelyn said, standing up from her stool. And a kettle. I think we both need something warm. Tea sounds perfect, Rose said. She stood as well, stretching her limbs with a cat-like grace that made Evelyn's stomach flutter. As Evelyn walked toward the back of the shop, she felt Rose's eyes tracking her every movement. It was a thrilling, terrifying sensation, being watched not as a professional, but as a woman. In the small, dimly lit backroom, Evelyn filled the electric kettle, her hands shaking slightly as she pressed the switch. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a moment to catch her breath. What are you doing? She asked herself. She was Evelyn Vance, the most sought-after restorer in the state, known for her absolute discipline and untouchable demeanor. Yet, a wet, mysterious stranger with a locked box had completely dismantled her defenses in the span of an hour. The sound of soft footsteps made her open her eyes. Rose stood in the doorway of the backroom. She had shed her wet wool socks and was now barefoot, her jeans rolled up slightly at the ankles. She had used a small towel to dry her hair, leaving the dark locks messy, wild, and incredibly inviting. The collar of her charcoal sweater sat slightly askew, exposing the elegant, pale curve of her collarbone. Your shop is beautiful, Rose said, leaning against the doorframe, crossing her arms. It feels like a place where time doesn't exist. That is the idea, Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady as she reached for 2 ceramic mugs. People bring me things they want to save from time. I simply facilitate the escape. And who saves you from it? Rose asked softly, her eyes searching Evelyn's face with a quiet, disarming sincerity. Evelyn paused, a mug in each hand. The question was too intimate, cutting through the professional shield she had spent years building. I don't need saving, Rose. Everyone needs saving from something, Evelyn, Rose said, taking a slow step into the small kitchen space. The room was narrow, and with Rose inside, the air suddenly felt incredibly warm. Even the savior. She stopped just a foot away from Evelyn. The scent of vanilla and sea salt was stronger now, warmed by the heat of the small room. Rose reached out, her hand resting on the counter next to Evelyn's. She wasn't touching her, but the proximity was so intense that Evelyn could feel the radiant warmth of Rose's body. Are you always this inquisitive with your service providers? Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. She set the mugs down, turning to face Rose fully. Only when they interest me, Rose replied, her eyes dropping to Evelyn's lips before rising back to meet her gaze. And you, Evelyn, are by far the most interesting thing I've found in this town. The kettle began to shriek, a sharp, sudden sound that broke the mounting tension. Evelyn jumped slightly, but Rose didn't flinch. She simply smiled, a slow, devastatingly handsome smile that made Evelyn's heart skip a beat. I'll get that, Rose murmured, reaching past Evelyn to turn off the kettle. As she did, her chest brushed against Evelyn's shoulder, a brief, lingering slide of fabric that sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. Rose poured the hot water into the teapot, her movements confident and relaxed. She was entirely at home in the quiet intimacy of the late-night space, while Evelyn felt like she was walking a tightrope without a net. Let's go see if your paper is ready, Rose said, handing a steaming mug to Evelyn, her fingers brushing against Evelyn's as she did. The touch was brief, but the warmth remained. They walked back into the main workshop, the steam from their mugs rising into the cool, dark air. Evelyn carefully placed her mug on a coaster away from the workbench and approached the humidification chamber, a sealed glass dome where the ancient vellum had been resting. Is it ready? Rose asked, standing close behind Evelyn, her breath warm against the back of Evelyn's neck. It should be, Evelyn said, her voice slightly breathless. She carefully lifted the glass dome. The paper had softened, the dry, brittle edges now supple enough to bend without breaking. Evelyn returned to her stool, and Rose immediately took her place on the stool beside her, leaning in so close that their shoulders pinned together. Using a pair of fine, blunt-tipped spatulas, Evelyn began the delicate process of unfolding the vellum. The paper resisted at first, the creases stubborn after more than a century of being folded tight. Careful, Rose whispered, her hand instinctively resting on the desk, just inches from Evelyn's elbow. Her fingers flexed, as if she wanted to reach out and steady Evelyn's hands herself. I am, Evelyn murmured. With one final, precise movement, the paper flattened. The ink was faded to a pale, ghostly brown, but the elegant, sweeping cursive was still perfectly legible. It was written in French. Evelyn stared at the elegant script, her eyes scanning the lines. It's a letter of confession. Can you read it? Rose asked, her voice laced with excitement. She leaned closer, her cheek nearly touching Evelyn's shoulder as she stared down at the paper. My French is a bit rusty, but... Evelyn began, her eyes tracing the elegant curves of the letters. She translated aloud, her voice soft and melodic in the quiet room. My dearest Clara. They tell me the sea is a graveyard of secrets, but I cannot let this one sink. The oil in this vial is the essence of the lavender we picked in the valley of grass, the scent of the night we swore our silent vows. If this box finds you, know that my heart remained anchored to yours, even as the waves took my breath. Evelyn's voice trailed off as she reached the end of the paragraph. The words were raw, filled with a desperate, beautiful passion that seemed to echo through the empty shop. It was a love letter, Rose whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She looked at Evelyn, her grey eyes shining with a soft, vulnerable light. From one woman to another. In a time when they couldn't be together. Yes, Evelyn said, her heart aching slightly at the tragic beauty of the words. A love that had to be hidden in a locked whalebone box and thrown into the sea. But it survived, Rose said softly. She reached out, her fingers gently covering Evelyn's bare hand on the desk. This time, there were no gloves. The contact of their skin was electric, a warm, pulsing connection that felt incredibly alive in the face of the ancient tragedy before them. The sea tried to destroy it, but it found its way here. To us. Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, then up at Rose. The playful, teasing light in Rose's eyes had been replaced by something much deeper, a quiet, intense longing that mirrored the words on the paper. Why did you really bring this to me, Rose? Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rose slid her stool a fraction closer, her knees brushing against Evelyn's. The heat between them was suffocating, yet neither of them wanted to breathe. Because, Rose whispered, her gaze dropping to Evelyn's lips before locking onto her eyes. I saw you in the cafe last week. You were analyzing a broken pocket watch with so much care, so much passion, and I knew. I knew that if I brought you a mystery, you wouldn't be able to resist. Evelyn's breath hitched. You planned this. I hoped for this, Rose corrected gently. She lifted her hand from the desk, her fingers rising to gently cup the side of Evelyn's face. Her thumb brushed over Evelyn's cheekbone, her touch as light as a whisper, yet incredibly warm. I wanted to see those beautiful hands work up close. And I wanted to see if the woman behind the glass was as captivating as I thought she was. Evelyn's heart was hammering so loudly she was certain Rose could hear it. The touch of Rose's hand on her face was dizzying, dissolving the last remnants of her professional restraint. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief second before opening to meet Rose's intense gaze. And? Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with a sweet, aching anticipation. Am I? Rose smiled, a soft, incredibly tender expression that made Evelyn's soul ache. She leaned in, the distance between them dissolving until their breath mingled in the space of a heartbeat. More, Rose murmured against Evelyn's lips. So much more. When their lips finally met, it was not a crash, but a slow, sweet, and incredibly tender collision. Rose's lips were soft, warm, and tasted faintly of the sweet tea they had shared. It was a kiss born of anticipation, of a night spent pulling at invisible threads, of secrets unlocked in the quiet dark. Evelyn's hand found its way to Rose's waist, her fingers gripping the soft fabric of her sweater, pulling her closer. Rose let out a soft, pleased sigh against Evelyn's mouth, her hand moving from Evelyn's cheek to the back of her neck, her fingers tangling in her hair, deepening the kiss with a gentle, possessive pressure. The storm raged outside, the rain lashing against the glass of the old shop, but inside, under the warm amber glow of the lamp, the mystery had finally been solved. The storm outside seemed to recede into a distant, muffled echo, completely swallowed by the quiet intensity inside the studio. The kiss broke slowly, reluctant and lingering, their lips parting just enough for a breath to pass between them before Rose rested her forehead gently against Evelyn's. Evelyn's fingers remained tangled in the soft wool of Rose's sweater, her pulse hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could feel the steady, rapid rise and fall of Rose's chest, the shared warmth of their breath creating a private world in the center of the dark shop. "I suppose," Evelyn murmured, her voice beautifully undone, stripped of its usual razor-sharp composure, "that this violates at least 3 clauses of my shop's standard consultation policy." Rose let out a low, breathy laugh that vibrated against Evelyn's skin. She didn't pull back entirely, her hand sliding down from the nape of Evelyn's neck to rest against the curve of her jaw, her thumb lightly tracing the line of Evelyn's lower lip. "Then I am incredibly glad I didn't ask to read the fine print." Evelyn forced her eyes open, meeting the stormy grey gaze that had completely dismantled her night. There was a vulnerability there now, a soft, glittering heat that made Evelyn's stomach flip in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with antiquities. "You are an incredibly dangerous distraction, Miss Rose," Evelyn whispered, though she didn't loosen her grip on Rose's sweater. "And you," Rose replied, her voice dropping to that sultry, smoky register that made Evelyn's skin prickle with goosebumps, "are entirely too accustomed to hiding behind dead things. I think you needed someone to remind you how alive you are." To prove her point, Rose's fingers trailed downward, over the sensitive column of Evelyn's neck, before coming to rest lightly over her collarbone. The warmth of her bare hand penetrated the linen of Evelyn's blouse, an anchor in the dark. Evelyn swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the whalebone box resting between them on the workbench. The ancient vellum letter lay open, its faded ink proclaiming a love that had outlived its creators by a century. The contrast was striking, the tragic, silent past, and the vibrant, breathing present. "We still have a mystery to finish," Evelyn said, trying to summon a shred of her professional discipline, though her voice lacked any real conviction. "Is that your way of telling me to behave?" Rose teased, a wicked, beautiful spark returning to her eyes. She slowly withdrew her hand, though she remained seated so close that her thigh pressed firmly against Evelyn's. "It is my way of preserving the artifact," Evelyn corrected, a faint flush rising to her cheeks. She turned back to the workbench, adjusting the jewelless lamp to focus squarely on the glass vial. The letter mentioned the oil. The essence of the lavender we picked in the Valley of Grass. If the wax seal has truly held for over 150 years, the compound inside might still be chemically intact. Rose leaned over Evelyn's shoulder again, the tip of her nose brushing against Evelyn's hair. "Can we open it? Or will it crumble into a puff of history like the paper?" "The glass is stable," Evelyn said, reaching for a small, specialized toolkit containing surgical steel blades and microforceps. "But the wax is brittle. If we want to preserve the seal's impression, I have to cut around the base of the cork with extreme precision." "Show me," Rose whispered, her hand settling naturally onto the back of Evelyn's chair, her presence enveloping. "I want to see how you do it." Evelyn took a slow, stabilizing breath. She pulled a fresh pair of cotton gloves onto her hands, the fabric sliding over her skin with a soft rustle. She picked up a microscalpel, her fingers automatically locking into the precise, steady grip she had practiced for a decade. Rose watched in absolute silence. The playful banter faded, replaced by a rapt, intense fascination as Evelyn began to work. The blade moved with micromillimeter movements, shaving away the tiniest fragments of ancient, crimson wax where it adhered to the lip of the glass vial. "Your hands are so steady," Rose murmured, her voice laced with a genuine, quiet reverence. "It's like you're performing surgery on time itself." "In a way," I am, Evelyn replied, not breaking her focus. If I slip, the blade scores the glass, or worse, breaks the cork into the liquid. You have to understand the material. You have to listen to how it resists you. And if it resists too much, then you change your approach, Evelyn said softly, her eyes flicking up to meet Rose's for a split second. You don't force it. You coax it. A slow, knowing smile spread across Rose's face. An excellent philosophy, Evelyn. For many things. Evelyn felt the heat rise in her neck but kept her hand perfectly still. With a final, delicate flick of the blade, the perimeter of the seal was free. She set the scalpel down and picked up a pair of padded pliers. Would you like to do the honors? Evelyn asked, looking at Rose. No, Rose said softly, her grey eyes locked onto Evelyn's face. I want to watch you do it. I want to see the moment the secret breaks. Evelyn nodded. She gripped the cork gently with the pliers and gave it a slow, deliberate twist. For a moment, it didn't move. The centuries had fused the cork to the glass. Evelyn didn't force it, she applied a steady, unyielding pressure, waiting for the material to yield. Click. A tiny, sharp sound echoed in the quiet room as the seal broke. Evelyn slowly pulled the cork upward. The moment the cork cleared the neck of the bottle, a wave of scent exploded into the amber light of the workbench. It wasn't the stale, musty smell of an old shop, nor was it the clinical tang of Rose's taxidermy. It was summer. A rich, heavy, and dizzyingly sweet aroma of pure, concentrated lavender, deepened by the dark, earthy undertone of aged ambergris and sweet resin, filled the air. It was a scent that felt entirely too vibrant for the rainy night, a fragment of a sun-drenched French valley preserved in a liquid tomb, suddenly waking up. Rose gasped softly, her eyes widening. Oh, wow. It smells like a memory. It's incredible, Evelyn whispered, genuinely stunned. She held the vial closer, inhaling the complex notes. The ambergris acted as a fixative. It locked the volatile top notes of the lavender into the oil. It hasn't degraded at all. Rose leaned in closer, her face inches from the vial, her eyes heavy with the sensory overload. It's beautiful. It's exactly what she wrote about. The scent of the night we swore our silent vows. Rose turned her head to look at Evelyn, the rich, romantic scent hanging thick between them like a physical mist. The atmosphere in the room had shifted again, charged with the phantom emotions of a long-dead love story that felt entirely too relevant to the two women sitting under the lamp. Evelyn, Rose whispered, her voice thick with an unspoken weight. Yes. Rose reached out, her bare hand gently taking the vial from Evelyn's gloved fingers. She set it carefully back down onto the velvet tray. Then, without a word, she reached up and gently took hold of the wrist of Evelyn's left glove. Slowly, deliberately, Rose peeled the white cotton fabric away, exposing Evelyn's skin inch by inch. Her movements were reverent, almost ritualistic. When the glove was fully off, Rose dropped it onto the desk and took Evelyn's bare hand in her own. Rose dipped the tip of her index finger into the very top of the open glass vial, catching a single, microscopic drop of the ancient, dark oil. Rose, what are you doing? Evelyn asked, her voice trembling slightly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Preserving a moment, Rose whispered. She lifted Evelyn's hand, her grey eyes holding Evelyn's gaze captive. With a slow, agonizingly gentle stroke, Rose applied the drop of lavender oil to the pulse point on Evelyn's wrist. The skin-to-skin contact was electric, but the addition of the warm, fragrant oil made it feel intensely intimate, almost intoxicating. Rose's thumb rubbed the oil into Evelyn's skin in slow, circular motions, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's. The heat of Evelyn's racing pulse warmed the oil, releasing another wave of the sweet, summer scent. "There," Rose murmured, her voice a low, captivated purr. She lifted Evelyn's wrist to her own lips, pressing a soft, lingering kiss directly over the scented pulse point. Evelyn let out a shaky, involuntary breath, her toes curling against the floor. "Now you smell like the secret." Evelyn couldn't take it anymore. The slow, agonizing pull, the sweet tension that had been building since the moment Rose walked through her door, it was too much. She reached out with her free hand, gripping the back of Rose's neck, and pulled her forward. This time, the kiss wasn't tentative. It was deep, possessive, and thick with the heavy scent of lavender and the wild salt of the rain. Rose let out a soft, sharp sound of surprise before wrapping her arms entirely around Evelyn's waist, lifting her slightly off the stool to pull her flush against her body. The workbench was forgotten. The ancient letter, the whalebone box, the centuries of history, all of it faded into the background as Evelyn leaned entirely into the solid, warm reality of the woman in her arms. Rose's lips were demanding now, answering Evelyn's hunger with a fierce, sweet intensity of her own. Her fingers dug into the fabric of Evelyn's blouse, anchoring them together in the dark. They moved together in a slow, rhythmic dance, the space between them completely vanishing. Every touch felt amplified, every breath shared. Evelyn's hands traveled up to Rose's shoulders, feeling the strong, athletic lines of her frame, before tangling deep into her damp, dark hair. When they finally broke apart for air, both of them were flushed, their breathing ragged and shallow in the quiet studio. Rose's eyes were dark, the pupils completely dilated, looking at Evelyn as if she were the only thing left in the universe. "I think," Evelyn whispered, her lips brushing against Rose's jawline as she spoke, her voice completely breathless, "that you are going to ruin my orderly life, Miss Rose." Rose smiled against Evelyn's skin, her hands resting firmly on Evelyn's hips, refusing to let her step away. "Your life was too quiet, Evelyn. A little ruin is good for the soul." Evelyn rested her head against Rose's shoulder, inhaling the complex, intoxicating mix of rain, vanilla, and the ancient lavender oil that now bound them together. For the first time in her life, she didn't care about the past, or the future, or the rules of her perfect, quiet sanctuary. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the old world, while inside, under the warm amber light, something entirely new was just beginning to bloom. The rain outside began to lose its aggressive edge, transitioning into a steady, rhythmic hum that enveloped the studio in an almost hypnotic tranquility. Inside the amber circle of the workbench, the air remained thick with the sweet, heavy ghost of ancient lavender and the electric, undeniable warmth of two people who had completely crossed the line of professional decorum. Rose's hands remained anchored on Evelyn's hips, the heat of her palms seeping through the linen of Evelyn's trousers. Neither of them made a move to step back. The high stool felt like a solitary island in the middle of a vast, dark ocean of antiquities, and they were perfectly content to be stranded together. "You know," Rose murmured, her voice a low, gravelly vibration that brushed against Evelyn's ear as she rested her chin on her shoulder, "I usually don't stay past the initial consultation. Most people just give me a receipt and tell me they'll call in 3 weeks. Evelyn let out a soft, breathy laugh, her hands still resting gently against the strong line of Rose's collarbones. Most people are not subjected to midnight visitations by women carrying century-old oceanic contraband. I believe my standard operating procedures allow for a few. Experimental adjustments under such circumstances. Experimental adjustments. Rose repeated, shifting back just enough to look Evelyn in the eyes. A devastatingly beautiful, teasing smirk played at the corner of her lips. Is that what this is? Research and development. I am merely analyzing the data, Evelyn whispered, her gaze dropping to the subtle pulse jumping in Rose's throat before rising to meet her grey eyes. And so far, the results are highly irregular. Let me help you calculate the variable, Rose said softly. She leaned in, her lips pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to the sensitive skin just below Evelyn's jawline. A quiet gasp escaped Evelyn's throat, her fingers instinctively tightening on Rose's shoulders. Rose didn't rush. She moved with the same calculated, intense focus Evelyn used when restoring a fragile artifact, tracing a path of soft, warm kisses along Evelyn's jaw until she reached the corner of her mouth. Rose. Evelyn breathed, the word a plea and a warning all at once. Still trying to be the sensible one. Rose whispered against her lips, her breath hot, sweet, and intoxicating. Even now, when you smell like a century of hidden passion. Someone has to be, Evelyn managed to say, though her actions completely contradicted her words as she tilted her head, closing the final millimeter of distance to capture Rose's lips once more. This kiss was slower, a deep, languid exploration that felt like a quiet conversation between their bodies. It was the kind of kiss that didn't need to rush because it knew it had all the time in the world. Rose's hands slid from Evelyn's hips up to the small of her back, pulling her flush against her chest, eliminating any remaining pocket of air between them. The sheer, unadulterated sweetness of the moment made Evelyn's chest ache with a sudden, profound realization. She had been hiding in this shop, surrounded by the remnants of other people's lives, completely forgetting to live her own. When they finally parted, their foreheads rested together, their breath mingling in the quiet space. The scent of the lavender oil on Evelyn's wrist wafted up, a reminder of the beautiful, tragic letter that had brought them together. We should probably secure the artifact, Evelyn said softly, her voice carrying a gentle, reluctant note. Leaving the oil exposed to the air for too long will accelerate the oxidation process, even with the ambergris fixative. Rose sighed, a sound of playful defeat, but she let her hands slide down to Evelyn's waist, allowing her a small amount of space. Always the protector of the past. All right, let's save the love story. Evelyn stood up from the stool, her legs feeling slightly detached from her body as she moved back to the workbench. She carefully picked up the padded pliers and the ancient cork. With meticulous care, she resealed the glass vial, ensuring a tight, airtight fit without damaging the remaining fragments of the original red wax seal. She then used a piece of acid-free glassine paper to gently cover the unfolded vellum letter, shielding the delicate ink from the ambient light. Rose watched her every move, her chin resting in her hand, her stormy eyes filled with a quiet, domestic warmth that sent a completely different kind of shiver down Evelyn's spine. This wasn't just raw, late-night attraction anymore, it was the beginning of something terrifyingly real. What happens to it now? Rose asked, gesturing to the box. Now that the mystery is out in the open. The vellum needs to spend a few days in a controlled deacidification bath to stabilize the paper fibers, Evelyn explained, her professional voice returning, though it was softer now, colored by the intimacy of the room. The whalebone box requires a deep injection of microcrystalline wax to stop the sea salt from causing deep structural cracks. It's a long process. It will take weeks. Rose's smirk returned, slow and incredibly charming. Weeks, you say? So what you're telling me is, I have an excuse to come back here. frequently. Evelyn turned to face her, leaning back against the edge of the heavy workbench, crossing her arms over her chest in a futile attempt to look composed. I suppose you do. If you care about the welfare of your investment, Miss Rose. Oh, I care immensely about the investment, Rose said, standing up from her stool and walking over to where Evelyn stood. She didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of her, her barefoot toes nearly touching Evelyn's leather Oxfords. She reached out, her fingers gently catching a stray lock of Evelyn's hair that had fallen out of its neat pin, tucking it behind her ear. But I think I care even more about the restorer. Evelyn's heart did a frantic, joyful flip. She reached up, covering Rose's hand with her own, pressing Rose's palm against her cheek. I am not a very easy person to know, Rose. I like my routines. I like my quiet. Quiet is overrated, Rose whispered, leaning down so their noses brushed. And routines are just waiting to be broken by the right storm. Is that what you are? A storm? Only the kind that clears the air, Rose murmured, her eyes softening into something so intensely tender it made Evelyn's breath catch. I want to take you out, Evelyn. In the daylight. Somewhere that doesn't smell like centuries of dust. Somewhere we can just be two women having coffee without a tragic love letter between us. Evelyn smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that completely transformed her face, wiping away the cool, guarded exterior she usually wore like armor. I would like that very much, Rose. Good, Rose said, kissing the tip of Evelyn's nose before finally stepping back, though her fingers lingered against Evelyn's until the very last second. She looked toward the high windows, where the first faint, pale grey light of dawn was beginning to bleed through the retreating rain clouds. The storm is breaking. And I believe I promised to stop dripping on your floor. The floor is fine, Evelyn said, walking over to the coat rack where Rose's heavy wool coat hung, still damp but no longer soaking. She brought it over, holding it out for her. But I think you should probably go home and get some sleep before you catch a cold. Marine taxidermy requires steady hands too, I assume. Rose slid her arms into the coat, looking at Evelyn with a look of pure, unadulterated captivation. My hands are perfectly steady, Evelyn. Especially when they're holding on to something I want to keep. She walked toward the heavy oak door of the shop, her bare feet silent on the wood. She stopped with her hand on the brass handle, turning back to look at Evelyn one last time. The morning light caught the edges of her dark hair, making her look like a wild, beautiful creature caught between the night and the day. I'll be back on Tuesday for the first progress report on the box, Rose said, her voice carrying a playful, challenging note. The shop opens at 10, Evelyn replied, her lips curving into a soft smile. I know, Rose said, her grey eyes flashing with that dangerous, beautiful heat. But I might just show up at midnight anyway. Just to see if the restorer is still analyzing the data. With a soft, melodic chuckle, Rose turned the handle and stepped out into the cool, fresh air of the breaking dawn, the bell above the door chiming a sweet, lonely note as it closed behind her. Evelyn stood in the center of the quiet shop for a long time, the silence no longer feeling empty, but heavy with anticipation. She looked down at her left wrist, where the faint, sweet scent of summer lavender still pulsed against her skin, a perfect, indelible promise of the storm to come. The Tuesday morning sun arrived in Willow Bay not with the dramatic fury of the previous week's storm, but with a crisp, brilliant clarity that turned the puddles on the cobblestones into shimmering mirrors. Inside the relic vault, the atmosphere was entirely transformed. The heavy amber glow of the midnight lamp had been replaced by long, sharp shafts of morning light cutting through the high windows, illuminating the thousands of floating dust motes like tiny, suspended diamonds. Evelyn stood at her secondary workbench, the one dedicated to chemical stabilization, wearing a crisp, pale blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled precisely to her elbows. The environment was clinical, organized, and utterly controlled, exactly how she had lived her life for the past 7 years. Yet, every 3 minutes, her eyes flicked toward the vintage brass clock ticking rhythmically on the wall. It was 9:57 a.m. On the center of the table rested the whalebone box. Its silver wave dials had been meticulously cleaned of the calcified sand, now gleaming with a soft, brushed luster. Beside it, the vellum letter lay submerged in a shallow, specialized glass tray filled with a clear deacidification solution, its ancient fibers absorbing the chemical matrix that would give it another century of life. Evelyn pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, her fingers smoothing the synthetic material down. She was perfectly prepared for a standard professional update. She had her data sheets printed, her microcrystalline wax measured, and her technical explanation practiced. Then, the brass bell above the front door chimed. Evelyn's breath hitched, a sharp, sudden tightening in her chest that completely derailed her train of thought. She set her microforceps down with a tiny, metallic clatter and turned around. Rose stepped into the shop, and the morning light seemed to instantly favor her. She wasn't the drenched, wild creature of the storm anymore, but the transition to daylight had done absolutely nothing to dull her impact. She wore a structured, dark olive canvas jacket over a simple white t-shirt, her dark hair dry and falling in loose, artfully messy waves around her sharp jawline. She looked entirely at ease, a relaxed, confident smile instantly spreading across her face the moment her grey eyes locked onto Evelyn. In her right hand, she carried 2 cardboard cups, the rich, bitter scent of freshly roasted coffee immediately invading the sterile, cedar and wax air of the shop. 10 o'clock on the dot, Rose said, her voice carrying that same low, smoky rasp that had haunted Evelyn's thoughts for the past 4 days. She walked forward, her boots clicking against the hardwood with a deliberate, slow rhythm. I told you I respect the rules of the establishment when the sun is up. Evelyn forced her hands to rest flat against the edge of the workbench, trying to anchor her rising pulse. Good morning, Miss Rose. I see you brought peace offerings. Not a peace offering, Rose corrected smoothly, stopping on the other side of the counter and setting one of the cups down precisely in front of Evelyn. An incentive. I figured if I'm going to make you talk about chemistry before you've had your caffeine, I should at least provide the antidote. Evelyn looked down at the cup, then up into the stormy grey depths of Rose's eyes. The memory of their lips meeting in the dark, surrounded by the scent of ancient lavender, flared between them like an active current. The daylight didn't diminish the tension, it just made it impossible to hide. Thank you, Evelyn said softly, her professional armor instantly showing its first cracks. She reached out and took the cup, her bare wrist exposing the exact spot where Rose had rubbed the oil 4 nights ago. Rose's eyes immediately tracked the movement, a soft, dangerous heat flickering in her gaze. She took a slow sip of her own coffee, leaning her hip against the counter in that familiar, casual way that seemed to shrink the space between them. So, tell me, Restorer. How is our love story holding up? Evelyn cleared her throat, gesturing toward the glass tray. The vellum is currently undergoing structural stabilization. The magnesium bicarbonate solution is neutralizing the organic acids in the paper. If you look closely, the fibers are beginning to relax, which means the ink won't flake when we dry it under weights tomorrow. Rose leaned over the counter to look, her shoulder brushing against Evelyn's sleeve. The scent of her, fresh cedar, sea salt, and a trace of citrus, was entirely different from the rainy night, yet no less intoxicating. And the box itself. The whalebone is highly porous, Evelyn explained, picking up a small jar of dense, translucent wax to maintain her composure. The sea salt has traveled deep into the matrix. I've completed the initial vacuum desiccation to draw out the residual moisture, but today I begin the microcrystalline wax injections. It will seal the microscopic pores and prevent the bone from splitting as it adapts to the dry indoor air. Rose didn't look at the box. She was watching Evelyn's face, a soft, captivated smile playing on her lips. You talk about it like it's a living patient. In a way, it is, Evelyn murmured, finally turning her head to meet Rosie's gaze. They were close enough that she could see the tiny flecks of silver in Rosie's irises. If I don't treat it with absolute precision, it dies. The history disappears. And you can't bear the thought of something beautiful disappearing, Rose whispered, her voice dropping to that intimate, midnight register. She set her coffee cup down, her hand sliding across the polished wood of the counter until her index finger lightly tapped the edge of Evelyn's nitrile glove. I admire that about you, Evelyn. The absolute devotion. Evelyn felt a familiar warmth blooming in her chest, a sweet, aching pull that made her want to abandon the workspace entirely. It's just my job, Rose. No, it isn't, Rose said softly, her finger sliding over the synthetic material of the glove, tracing the long, elegant line of Evelyn's index finger underneath. The subtle pressure was incredibly electric, even through the barrier. A job is what people do to pay the bills. This is reverence. You care about the hands that made this box. You care about the woman who wrote that letter. Evelyn swallowed hard, her eyes locked onto Rosie's fingers. And what about you? The marine taxidermist. Do you have reverence for the things you preserve? Rose let out a quiet, thoughtful hum, her hand shifting until her palm rested flat against the counter, just an inch from Evelyn's. I do. But my work is about capturing a moment of wildness. A shark mid-turn, a bird at the peak of its dive. I freeze the energy before it rots. You take the things that have already been broken by the world and you give them a second chance to breathe. She tilted her head, a stray lock of dark hair falling into her eyes. I think that's much more beautiful. The silence that followed was heavy, sweet, and charged with an unspoken understanding. The bustling sounds of the morning street outside, the distant hum of traffic, the call of seagulls over the bay, felt like they belonged to a completely different dimension. Evelyn slowly pulled her hand back, but only to peel the nitrile glove off her left hand. She tossed it onto the desk, exposing her bare skin to the cool air, and then placed her hand back down, directly over Rose's palm. Rose's breath caught, just a fraction. Evelyn's bare fingers slid into the spaces between Rose's, locking their hands together in the bright morning light. Rose's skin was warm, slightly rough from her lab work, and the solid reality of the touch made Evelyn's heart hammer a frantic, joyful rhythm against her ribs. I thought you said you wanted to take me out in the daylight, Evelyn whispered, a rare, playful smile gracing her lips. Somewhere without a tragic love letter between us. Rosie's grey eyes widened slightly before softening into an expression of pure, unadulterated delight. She squeezed Evelyn's hand tightly, her thumb rubbing the side of Evelyn's index finger. I did. And the offer stands. In fact, I know a little bakery down by the docks that has the best lemon tarts in the county. But I wasn't sure if the untouchable Evelyn Vance allowed herself lunch breaks. She doesn't, Evelyn murmured, her gaze dropping to Rose's lips before rising back to meet her eyes. But as I mentioned before, the standard operating procedures are currently undergoing significant revisions. Rose laughed, a low, rich sound that made Evelyn's stomach flip in the most wonderful way possible. Then let's get out of here before you change your mind and try to sterilize me. Evelyn turned back to the workbench for a brief moment, her movements swift and practiced as she placed a protective glass shield over the deacidification tray and secured the jar of microcrystalline wax. She picked up her keys from the hook, her bare hand immediately returning to find Rose's as they walked toward the front door. As Evelyn reached out to flip the sign on the glass door from open to closed, she paused, looking at their joined hands reflected in the window against the backdrop of the sunlit harbor. For years, she had been the curator of secrets, the silent observer of other people's histories. But as she looked at the vibrant, beautiful woman standing beside her, she realized the mystery wasn't just about what was hidden in the past. It was about the wild, beautiful, and completely unpredictable storm that was waiting for them in the future. Rose pulled the door open, the brass bell chiming a bright, celebratory note as they stepped out into the brilliant, salt-kissed morning air together. The salt-kissed morning air outside the shop was crisp, but the moment they stepped onto the boardwalk, the sea breeze felt more like an invitation than a chill. Willow Bay was waking up, the distant, rhythmic clattering of crab traps being loaded onto boats and the shrill, lonely cries of gulls wheeling overhead formed a lively, industrial symphony. Yet, as Rose led Evelyn down the wooden steps toward the harbor, the bustling coastal town seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, tethered together by the simple, solid heat of their joined hands. "You look remarkably official for someone playing truant," Rose noted, her voice a low, teasing murmur against the wind. She shot a sidelong glance at Evelyn's pristine button-down shirt and tailored trousers. "I feel like I've kidnapped a high-ranking diplomat." Evelyn didn't let go of Rose's hand. Instead, she tightened her grip, her thumb tracing the slight callus at the base of Rose's index finger. "This is my standard attire for dealing with volatile compounds, Miss Rose." "I didn't realize a pastry excursion required a dress code." "It requires a willingness to get powdered sugar on your chin," Rose countered, her grey eyes flashing with a bright, sunny mischief that looked entirely different from the dark intensity of the rainy night, yet no less captivating. "And considering how meticulously neat you are, I'm counting that as a major victory." They turned a corner past a row of weathered, cedar-shingled bait shops, arriving at a small, unassuming bakery tucked between two marine supply warehouses. A hand-painted sign above the door read "The Salty Crumb," and the aroma drifting through the open screen door was a dizzying mix of caramelized sugar, browning butter, and yeast. Rose pulled the door open, the bell above it giving a dull, metallic plunk that made them both smile, a stark contrast to the elegant antique chime of the relic vault. The bakery was small, featuring just 3 mismatched wooden tables and a counter packed with heavy glass display cases. A massive, sun-faded calico cat slept soundly on a stool near the window, completely undisturbed by the patrons. "Rose," a booming voice called out from behind the counter. A stout woman with flour dusted across her apron and graying hair tied in a messy bun beamed at them. "I thought the storm washed you out to sea last week." "The usual." "Not quite today, Martha," Rose said, her tone warm and easy as she stepped up to the counter, bringing Evelyn with her. "Today we need the good stuff. The lemon tarts. 2 of them. And whatever you have that's fresh out of the oven." Martha's eyes darted down to their locked hands, a knowing, entirely approving smile widening her features. She looked up at Evelyn, assessing her polished appearance with a good-natured hum. "Well, aren't you going to introduce your friend, Rose? It's not every day you bring a lady in here who looks like she knows exactly which fork to use." Evelyn felt a sudden, unfamiliar warmth rise to her cheeks, but before she could speak, Rose leaned her shoulder against Evelyn's, a protective, casual gesture that instantly grounded her. "Martha, this is Evelyn," Rose said, her voice dropping to a softer, distinctly proud register. "She runs the antique shop up on the ridge. She's the only reason my shipwreck box didn't turn to dust." "Ah, the restorer," Martha said, nodding sagely as she used a pair of wax paper sheets to lift two vibrant, yellow tarts topped with delicate, toasted peaks of meringue. "I've heard of you. You're the one who fixes things everyone else gives up on. Well, you picked a good one here. Rose might smell like a biology lab half the time, but she's got a good heart." "Martha, please," Rose groaned, though her smile remained broad and unbothered. "You're ruining my mysterious, brooding taxidermist reputation. You lost that reputation the second you spent 20 minutes trying to revive a waterlogged sparrow on my back deck, dear," Martha cackled, placing the tarts on a small tray alongside two fresh napkins. "Go sit down. I'll bring the tea over." They took the small table in the corner, farthest from the door, right next to the sleeping calico cat. The morning sun streamed directly through the glass, warming the worn grain of the tabletop. Evelyn sat down, her eyes tracking the way Rose moved, how she shed her canvas jacket with an easy, fluid grace, her white t-shirt clinging slightly to the athletic line of her shoulders. There was a raw, unpretentious honesty to Rose that Evelyn found utterly magnetic. In Evelyn's world, everything was calculated, preserved, and hidden behind velvet ropes or glass cases. Rose lived entirely in the present tense, unshielded and vibrant. "What?" Rose asked softly, catching Evelyn's gaze as she sat across from her. She leaned her chin in her hand, her grey eyes searching Evelyn's face with a quiet, disarming intensity. "Nothing," Evelyn murmured, reaching for her tart. "I am simply observing the local wildlife." "Is that what I am?" "Wildlife?" Rose teased, her index finger reaching across the table to lightly tap the back of Evelyn's hand. "I thought we established I was a storm." "Storms pass," Evelyn said, her voice dropping a fraction, her eyes holding Rose's captive. "You seem remarkably persistent, Miss Rose." Rose's expression softened, the playful banter melting away into something much deeper, much sweeter. She turned her hand over, inviting Evelyn to slide her fingers back into hers. Evelyn didn't hesitate. The contact was instant, a warm, pulsing current that seemed to bypass the logic of the bright room entirely. "I am persistent when it comes to things that matter," Rose said softly. She used her free hand to break off a small piece of her tart, the golden crust flaking beautifully. She held it out across the table, her eyes dropping to Evelyn's lips. "Taste it. Martha really is a genius." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her heart doing a familiar, frantic flutter against her ribs as she took the pastry from Rose's fingers. Her lips brushed against the warm tips of Rose's skin, a deliberate, lingering touch that made Rose's pupils dilate instantly. The tart was spectacular, sharp, intensely sour lemon curd balanced perfectly by the buttery, melt-in-your-mouth crust and the marshmallow-sweet meringue. "It's incredible," Evelyn admitted, wiping a tiny speck of crumb from her lower lip with her thumb. Before she could lower her hand, Rose reached across, her bare fingers gently catching Evelyn's wrist. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she guided Evelyn's thumb toward her own mouth, her tongue darting out for a split second to lick the stray crumb from Evelyn's skin. Evelyn's breath hitched sharply, a sudden, delicious heat spreading straight down to her core. The sheer audacity of the gesture, performed in a brightly lit bakery in the middle of the morning, was intoxicating. You're right, Rose murmured, her voice a low, sultry rasp as she released Evelyn's wrist, her grey eyes burning with a quiet fire. It is incredible. Rose, Evelyn whispered, a breathless laugh escaping her lips as she looked around the empty corner of the bakery. We are in public. Martha is in the back, the cat is asleep, and I am entirely focused on the woman in front of me, Rose replied smoothly, a wicked, beautiful tilt to her mouth. She leaned closer over the small table, the distance between them shrinking until Evelyn could see the faint, clean scent of the harbor evaporating off Rose's skin. Besides, I think a little public display is good for you. It proves you aren't an antique behind a glass pane, Evelyn. You're real. You're here. With me. Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, then up into the honest, fierce gaze of the woman across from her. The lingering fear she always carried, the fear of vulnerability, of letting someone past the neat, orderly boundaries of her life, felt incredibly small under the warmth of Rose's touch. I am here, Evelyn agreed softly, her fingers tightening around Rose's. Though I suspect my reputation as a terrifyingly strict business owner is entirely ruined if anyone sees us. Good, Rose said, her eyes softening into an expression of profound tenderness. Strict is boring. I prefer this version of you. The one who lets herself taste the sweetness. Martha returned with a steaming ceramic teapot, breaking the spell but not the connection. They spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing. Rose described the strange, beautiful anatomy of deep-sea creatures she had preserved, her hands moving with passionate gestures as she spoke, while Evelyn found herself laughing freely, sharing stories of the eccentric collectors who frequented her shop. By the time they stepped back out onto the boardwalk, the sun was high in the sky, turning the harbor into a blinding sheet of silver. The air was warmer now, the salt scent heavier. They walked slowly back toward the ridge, their hands swinging gently between them. As they reached the steps of the relic vault, Rose stopped, turning to face Evelyn on the top wooden landing. The bright daylight caught the sharp angles of her face, highlighting a small, faint freckle near her temple that Evelyn hadn't noticed in the dark. Thank you for coming out with me, Rose said softly, her hands resting on the lapels of Evelyn's structured shirt, her thumbs lightly rubbing the fabric. I know it's hard for you to leave your sanctuary. It was an acceptable diversion, Evelyn said, her voice laced with a quiet, warm irony. She reached up, her hands settling naturally on Rose's waist, pulling her a fraction closer until their jackets brushed. Though I believe I have a whalebone box waiting for its microcrystalline wax injections. And I have a sunfish that needs my attention, Rose murmured, her gaze dropping to Evelyn's mouth. But I think the wax can wait 5 more minutes. Can it? Definitely, Rose whispered. She leaned in, and this time, there was no hesitation, no midnight shadows to hide behind. The kiss was open, sweet, and deeply confident, born of the bright morning sun and the undeniable reality of what was growing between them. Rose's lips were soft, tasting faintly of lemon and sweet tea, her hands shifting to the back of Evelyn's neck, her fingers tangling in the neat hair that had finally completely come undone from its pins. Evelyn let herself sink into it, her arms wrapping securely around Rose's back, holding her tight against the ocean breeze. It wasn't a secret anymore. It wasn't a tragic love letter hidden in the dark. It was loud, beautiful, and entirely theirs. When they finally broke apart, Rose rested her nose against Evelyn's cheek, a soft, happy sigh escaping her. Tuesday is a long way away, Restorer. The shop is open every day, Rose, Evelyn whispered against her ear, her heart full to bursting. And as the owner, I have the authority to authorize as many, experimental consultations as I see fit." Rose laughed, a rich, triumphant sound that echoed over the quiet ridge. She stepped back, her grey eyes shining with a promise that made the future look brighter than any antique Evelyn had ever saved. "I'll see you tomorrow, Evelyn," Rose said, flashing that devastating, beautiful smile before turning to walk down the wooden steps, her stride confident and free. Evelyn stood on the landing, watching her until she turned the corner by the harbor. She looked down at her bare wrist, where the faint, memory scent of the ancient lavender oil mixed perfectly with the fresh, wild salt of the sea air. She smiled, turned the key in the heavy oak door, and stepped inside, ready to fix the past, but entirely eager for the future. The Wednesday morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Evelyn found herself standing by the glass display windows of the shop, a fresh cup of black coffee cooling in her hand. For the first time in 7 years, she hadn't immediately checked the humidity gauges or calibrated the dust filtration systems upon opening. Instead, her eyes were anchored to the winding harbor path below, watching the distant figures walking along the docks. The bell above the heavy oak door gave its signature, crisp chime at exactly 8:15 a.m., nearly 2 hours before the official opening sign would be flipped. Evelyn didn't startle this time. A quiet, knowing warmth bloomed in her chest before she even turned around. Rose stood in the doorway, the early morning light casting a long, elegant shadow behind her. She wore a faded denim jacket over a dark knit sweater, her hands buried deep in her pockets, and her dark hair still slightly wild from the sea breeze. She looked slightly tired, as if she had spent the night awake in her own lab, but the moment her grey eyes found Evelyn, the exhaustion vanished, replaced by that familiar, fierce intensity. "You're open early," Rose said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp that felt entirely too intimate for the vast, silent shop. She didn't stay by the door, her boots clicked against the hardwood in a slow, deliberate cadence as she closed the distance between them. "Only for exceptional circumstances," Evelyn replied softly, setting her coffee cup down on a nearby display case. She didn't move away as Rose stepped into her personal space, the scent of the morning tide and crisp pine instantly washing over her. "And I believe a marine taxidermist with no regard for business hours qualifies as exceptional." "I tried to stay away until 10, Rose murmured, stopping just a foot away. A slow, beautifully devastating smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "I really did. I sat in my lab, looking at a specimen for 2 hours. But all I could think about was the way you looked in the daylight yesterday. The way you tasted like lemon and sweet textbook defiance." Evelyn's heart gave a violent, joyful thud against her ribs. She reached out, her fingers catching the rough denim of Rose's jacket sleeves, anchoring them together. "You are an incredibly disruptive influence, Rose." "Good," Rose whispered, her hands coming out of her pockets to rest gently against Evelyn's waist. The heat of her palms was instantaneous, melting the morning chill. "A little disruption keeps the structural integrity from becoming rigid." "Isn't that what you told me?" "I told you no such thing," Evelyn breathed, though she leaned closer, her eyes dropping to the soft, inviting line of Rose's mouth. "That is a gross misinterpretation of stabilization theory." "Then correct me," Rose murmured against her lips. The kiss was sudden but remarkably tender, a quiet, deep collision that tasted of fresh morning air and shared anticipation. Rose's hands slid from Evelyn's waist to the small of her back, pulling her flush against her body with a gentle, possessive pressure that made Evelyn's knees feel momentarily weightless. Evelyn's hands traveled upward, her fingers tangling into the soft wool of Rose's sweater, holding onto the solid, vibrant reality of her. When they finally parted, Rose rested her forehead against Evelyn's, their breathing shallow and rhythmic in the quiet room. I brought you something, Rose whispered after a moment, her thumb lightly tracing the curve of Evelyn's hip. Not an antiquity. Something from my side of the world. Evelyn blinked, her senses still slightly dizzy from the kiss. A dead fish. Rose let out a rich, echoing laugh that filled the high-ceilinged shop with a warmth it had lacked for years. No, you absolute romantic. Though I'm flattered you think so highly of my trade. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, polished object, placing it gently into Evelyn's palm. It was a piece of sea glass, but unlike the common green or brown fragments found along the shore, this one was a deep, mesmerizing violet, the exact shade of the midnight blue velvet inside the whalebone box. It had been tumbled by the ocean for decades, its edges perfectly smooth, its surface holding a soft, frosted matte finish that caught the morning light like a gemstone. It's beautiful, Evelyn murmured, turning the frosted glass in her fingers. It's rare, Rose said softly, her eyes locked onto Evelyn's face, watching the genuine fascination in her features. Violet sea glass usually comes from old apothecary bottles from the late 1800s. The ocean takes something broken, washes away the sharp edges, and turns it into something smooth and resilient. She reached out, her fingers gently covering Evelyn's hand, sealing the glass inside her palm. Reminded me of you. Evelyn looked up, her throat tightening with a sudden, profound emotion. Because I am old and broken. Because you take the broken things and give them a place to belong, Rose corrected gently, her grey eyes shining with an absolute, unshielded sincerity. And because you are the rarest thing I've ever found on this coast. The silence that followed was heavy, sweet, and charged with an intensity that made the surrounding antiques feel like mere background noise. Evelyn slowly slid the violet glass into her pocket, her hand returning to grip Rose's fingers tightly. Come, Evelyn said softly, leading Rose toward the back workshop. Let me show you the progress on the box. The microcrystalline injections have settled. The workshop was bathed in a clean, white light, the tools arranged with mathematical precision. The whalebone box rested on a clean piece of felt, its surface glowing with a rich, deep luster after the wax treatment. The microscopic cracks that had threatened to split the bone were gone, sealed by the protective compound. Rose stepped up to the bench, her hand naturally settling over Evelyn's shoulder, her chin resting near Evelyn's ear as she looked down at the artifact. It looks healthier. If that makes sense for a piece of bone. It makes perfect sense, Evelyn said, picking up a fine microfiber cloth to buff a tiny section of the silver filigree. The wax has stabilized the internal moisture matrix. It won't react to the changes in temperature anymore. It's safe now. And the letter? Rose asked, her voice dropping to a low murmur. Evelyn pointed to a specialized drying press lined with blotter paper. The deacidification bath was a success. The paper fibers have rebonded. Tomorrow, I will carefully extract it and place it in a UV protective glass sleeve. She turned her head slightly, her nose brushing against Rose's cheek. The love story is officially preserved, Rose. Rose turned her head, their lips less than an inch apart, her grey eyes dark with a quiet, mounting hunger. Then our work here is done for the morning. Is it? Evelyn whispered, her pulse fluttering against her ribs. Not quite, Rose murmured, her hand sliding up the back of Evelyn's neck, her fingers gently tilting Evelyn's face upward. We still have to test the stabilization of the restorer. When Rose kissed her this time, it was deeper, more demanding, filled with the raw energy of the wild sea they had stood beside yesterday. Evelyn backed up slightly until her hips pressed against the edge of the heavy oak workbench, her hands reaching up to grip Rose's shoulders, pulling her closer until the world outside the room completely ceased to exist. The workbench creaked slightly under their weight, a soft, old sound that was instantly swallowed by the rhythmic sound of their breathing and the sweet, dizzying warmth of the summer lavender oil still faintly clinging to the air. Rose's lips traveled down to Evelyn's jaw, her breath hot against the pale skin, sending a wave of electric shivers straight down Evelyn's spine. Rose. Evelyn breathed, her fingers tightening in Rose's dark hair, completely surrendering to the beautiful, chaotic storm that had broken through her quiet sanctuary. "I'm here," Rose whispered against her skin, her hands sliding under the rolled-up sleeves of Evelyn's shirt, her bare palms warm against Evelyn's forearms. "I'm right here." Outside, the town of Willow Bay continued its morning routine, the harbor boats honking their horns as they left the docks, completely unaware that inside the quiet old shop on the ridge, a century-old mystery had faded away, leaving behind a love story that was just beginning to breathe. The morning sun had fully claimed the workshop, shifting from a sharp amber to a brilliant, unyielding gold that illuminated every corner of the relic vault. The whalebone box rested on its felt pad, gleaming with a quiet, restored dignity, its silver dials reflecting the light in sharp, bright starbursts. Evelyn's hands were still resting on Rose's shoulders, the fabric of the dark knit sweater soft beneath her palms. The lingering warmth of their kiss hung between them, a silent, heavy sweetness that made the idea of returning to a sterile routine feel entirely impossible. "I suppose this means the investigation is officially concluded," Evelyn said softly, her voice carrying a relaxed, gentle lilt that would have shocked anyone who knew her only as the untouchable, meticulous archivist. Rose didn't loosen her grip around Evelyn's waist. Instead, she leaned back just a fraction, her grey eyes crinkling at the corners with a thoroughly captivated, lazy warmth. "Concluded? Not a chance, Restorer. We've only stabilized the primary structure. Now comes the long-term observation phase. I need to monitor the artifact's environment. Frequently. And by environment, I assume you mean my shop." Evelyn teased, her fingers lightly tracing the strong line of Rose's collarbone. "I mean your shop, your workbench, and specifically, the woman running them," Rose murmured, her voice dropping to that low, smoky rasp that sent a familiar, pleasant shiver straight down Evelyn's spine. She reached up, her bare fingers gently catching the edge of Evelyn's jaw, her thumb lightly brushing the lower curve of her lip. "You've spent years looking backward, Evelyn. I think it's going to take a lot of work to keep you looking forward." Evelyn swallowed, her gaze dropping to Rose's mouth before rising back to meet that intense, grey stare. "I am a historian, Rose. Looking backward is in my nature." "Then I'll just have to give you something much better to look at in the present," Rose whispered. She leaned in, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the corner of Evelyn's mouth, then another to the sensitive skin just beneath her ear. Evelyn let out a quiet, involuntary breath, her hands sliding up to tangle in the messy, wild waves of Rose's dark hair, pulling her closer until the solid reality of Rose's body was the only anchor she had. The ticking of the vintage brass clock on the wall felt distant, a rhythmic, forgotten detail in a room that had completely broken free from the constraints of time. The scent of the lavender-infused wax on the silver dials mingled perfectly with the sharp, clean tang of the ocean breeze drifting through the cracked window, creating a new, distinct atmosphere that belonged entirely to them. "Rose," Evelyn breathed, her voice a soft plea against Rose's skin as Rose's lips traced a slow, deliberate path down the side of her neck. "The shop opens in less than an hour. Then we have exactly 45 minutes of unauthorized research left," Rose murmured against her skin, her hands shifting to the small of Evelyn's back, pressing her firmly against the edge of the heavy workbench. "You are completely incorrigible," Evelyn whispered, though she didn't make a single move to pull away. Instead, she leaned entirely into the embrace, surrendering to the beautiful, chaotic storm that had dismantled her quiet world and left something infinitely more vibrant in its place. Rose looked up, her grey eyes dark with a quiet, fierce tenderness that made Evelyn's heart ache in the most wonderful way. "I am just a woman who knows a rare treasure when she finds one, Evelyn. And I have absolutely no intention of letting this one stay locked away." Evelyn smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that completely erased the cool, professional distance she had worn like armor for so long. She reached out, her bare hand locking its fingers with Rose's, their palms pressing together in the bright, golden light of the workshop. "It's not locked anymore, Rose," Evelyn whispered softly, her eyes holding Rose's captive. "You found the key." Rose's smile was beautiful, rich with a profound, quiet triumph. She squeezed Evelyn's hand tightly, her thumb tracing the pulse point on her wrist where the ghost of the summer lavender oil still lingered. "Then let's make sure we never lose it." Outside, the harbor boats continued their steady, rhythmic work, the town of Willow Bay moving forward into the bright, sunlit day, completely unaware that inside the old antique shop on the ridge, the past had finally been laid to rest, leaving behind a love story that was just beginning to breathe.